Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for a really important conversation. Always been an important conversation, but even more so now, I think. My name is Jack McDougall, and I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Washington Board of Trade. You know, as many of us know, our region is generally prosperous, yet that prosperity is not shared across all of our communities. Still, too many individuals are excluded from quality education, employment, and other drivers of economic and personal advancement due to racism, ableism, and other wrongful barriers. And ultimately, this hurts everyone and holds us all back. So we need to work together to figure out a better way forward. And so at the Board of Trade, we're working to help organizations adopt robust and high-impact diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies to deal with these challenges and drive positive change. We're also a really strong supporter of Easterseals' vision to create an inclusive environment where all individuals can lead meaningful lives, which is why we're proud to partner with Easterseals and our knowledge partner, Accenture, to bring you this three-part series on improving accessibility in the workplace, which will lead to an inclusive economic recovery as we emerge from the pandemic. Today, our panel will explore the many personal and professional benefits of prioritizing mental health and how it leads to a positive, inclusive culture. But before I turn this over to our moderator, I do want to especially thank our sponsors, people at Verizon and Comcast, and again, our knowledge partner, Accenture, for their support to make this really important event and series possible. So I want to thank you all. Now I'm pleased to welcome our guests. First, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Anneke Cupito, who is the Global Mental Health and Wellness Program Lead at Accenture. And joining Anneke is Schmude, the president of the Mid-Atlantic market at Cigna, Anneke Vandenbroek, who is the clinic director at Stephen A. Cohen Military Family Clinic at Easterseals, and Quentin, SaLay, the region vice president of human resources at Comcast. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature and we will get to those towards the end of the conversation. And so now let's get started and I'll turn it over to Anneke. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jack, and thanks for having us all here today. Mental health is increasingly super important to not only everyone in the United States, but everyone worldwide. I think recent reports I read said that the incidence of anxiety and depression, clinically diagnosed anxiety and depression, have gone up from 21% this time last year to 40% today. So just since the pandemic ended, we're double the incidence of anxiety and depression being diagnosed in individuals. And in the workplace, 2/3 of employees are saying that they are experiencing symptoms of anxiety and depression. And more employers are being asked, what are we doing about it? So I think we're going to hear from everyone today on why it matters and what we're doing about it, and then what you as the audience can take away from this session today, either taking back as an individual or back to your own organization to make sure that people are getting the help they need. So I want to dig in and introduce our panelists, but I want to do so in a personal way. So I know that mental health is incredibly important to all of us. And most of you on the call have probably been touched by mental health at some point in your life. So I'd love to hear from each of you on why this matters to you. Monica, I'm going to come to you first.
Thank you. And thank you to all the sponsors and to the Greater Washington Board of Trade for the opportunity to have this discussion today. As you mentioned, such an important one. So president of Cigna Mid-Atlantic, I oversee business for Cigna in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. And in doing so, I have a broad ability to see a broad view of healthcare in general. And so for me personally, from a professional standpoint, I have the privilege of working for an organization that really puts whole health at the center of everything that we do. And we not only create solutions for our constituents to solve some of those challenges, but we really think that way as an employer as well. And during our discussion today, I'm happy to talk about some of those ways that we do that. From a personal perspective, I would say my why is exactly what you just said. I can't think of someone in my life, whether that be professional, personal, community, that isn't impacted by mental health. the impact of mental health as a patient or the impact of mental health as a support system. And so the answer of what can we do, we all can do something with the awareness of knowing somebody and then having the tools and resources that we'll talk about today to tap into to help.
Thanks, Monica. Quentin, over to you. What's your personal commitment and passion to mental health?
Yes, thank you, Allie. And also thank you to Easterseals and the Board of Trade for the invitation to participate on the panel. I have to say that mental health, it includes our emotional, our psychological well-being. It affects everything that we see, we think, we feel, that we touch. And I would say that being a business leader, a global business leader, I see the effect of mental health within the business environment that not so many years ago, it would be taboo to talk about. And seeing employees, professional people struggle mentally, but being afraid to bring forth those issues because it might be career limiting is a painful thing to watch. But now that the environment is open to the discussion, and while we have started this work so many years ago to create an environment for employees to talk, but also provide the resources, it becomes hugely personal to me. One reason, being a people advocate, but two, understanding the impact of mental health on the enterprise's ability to meet its strategic objectives. They're not mutually exclusive, they are combined. And so that's my mission, it's my passion to see people succeed in a mentally healthy way, a psychologically safe way, and that in result creates the opportunity for the organization to be successful.
Thank you for being that people advocate. So many people need that. Anneke, over to you. What's your personal passion about this space?
Well, I would say a little bit of everything that the other panelists have already touched on. And in addition, as a mental health provider, I would say also advocating for people with mental health issues. We know that when we look at people with mental health conditions who are getting public care, which often means that they are uninsured, which often means that they're unemployed, 80% on average across the US are unemployed, and that being employed is a significant protective factor. It improves treatment outcomes. So not only do we need to attend to the mental health, and wellness of employees, but we really need to look at the opportunities for employment for people with mental health conditions. There are states where the unemployment rate is actually over 90% for people in this category. So I'm very interested and concerned on the sort of business and wellness side, but I'm also concerned on the side of opportunities for people with mental health issues to get employed and to come into an environment that's prepared to support them and advocate for their needs in the workplace.
Thank you, Anneke. Super important. Socioeconomic factors can absolutely disproportionately affect people in and out of the workforce. Absolutely. And we all know that, I don't know if we all know this, but if you don't, there's only one professional therapist for every 10,000 people in the world that need one right now. And a psychologist in therapy is expensive if your insurance plan doesn't cover it. So super important for access to care. I'm here because I have a severe anxiety disorder. You'll catch me fumbling over my words occasionally. That anxiety builds up sometimes when I don't expect it to, but I got diagnosed with that formally in 2015. But I didn't actually, I lived with it my whole life. So I'd had it for 15 years before that. I just didn't get a diagnosis till 2015. And it still took me 2 years to tell anybody at work that I had an anxiety disorder. So I did a really sort of good job of hiding it at the workplace. Quentin mentioned the stigma associated with it. We don't talk about mental health. You know, if we have a physical disability or if we suffer from a broken leg or diabetes, then we can bring that up at work. But if we have anxiety, we don't talk about it because it's, you know, well, I can't see it, so therefore it's not there. And I told my story and shared it with everyone on a global call, and then proactively started to support our mental health ally network and the growth of our mental health ally network across Accenture. And the sole purpose of which is to make it okay to talk about not being okay and signposting people to help. So I've got myself a full-time job looking after mental health allies in every corner of the globe. And I love what I do. So that's why I'm here. I also have a son on the autism spectrum and have a whole host of other people that have touched my life that have mental health conditions. And I just want to make it okay to talk about it, make sure everybody here knows that they can get help when they need it. So I'm going to open it up to our first question for our panelists. But before I do, I think we have a poll. So the audience, I'd love to hear from you. We have a couple of questions that we'd love your response on. So let us know just how you're feeling in general. Why are you here today? What are you hoping to get out of today's session? And what's worrying you? What's your top worry when it comes to the workplace right now? So Quentin, I'm going to come to you with this first question. We've all been talking about return to work, hybrid working, omni working, virtual working, in-office working, and it's causing anxiety and stress, as you can imagine. What are you seeing companies do now in terms of creating a positive environment for folks to come back to if they choose to, or around mental health in particular?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Ali, and it's a very timely question. As I look at what organizations are doing worldwide as it relates to how we think about returning people to office, it makes me go back to, if you think about maybe 18 months ago, the entire world was moved from office workers to being remote workers within a day's time. And so many organizations that did not have a distributed work strategy, they catapulted into this remote working dynamic pretty much overnight. You can imagine the stress and the concern with employees and leaders as we navigate this, because it was a complex thing to do. But when I look back, moving employees from the office to working remotely in response to COVID, compared to moving employees back into the office space post-COVID, is even more stressful because there are even more concerns. There are concerns about, if I'm vaccinated, what happens in an environment where there are people who are not vaccinated. We have the president mandate that companies have to navigate through. And there are not a lot of details relative to OSHA and how they will respond based on testing and vaccines. So again, it creates more stress. One of the things that we've done as an organization, and I've also seen this through similarly situated big box companies, is to first say to employees, please know that your health and safety is our first priority. I think making that clear to people, put people in a position where they could just exhale and say the organization is going to put our safety and our health first. And then we'll look as the science dictates on how we will start to bring people back into the office space. Many companies have taken many varied approaches. In the interest of time, I won't go through all of those, but companies are looking at bringing people back in phases. Some bringing back your VPs and your senior leaders first to ensure that the office environment is ready and tested before you bring back other employees. But from a mental health perspective, it is giving employees that sense of what the company's priority is. And that is you, the employee, making certain that you're returning into an environment that's going to be safe for you.
Thank you. I think that's great. Anneke or Monica, anything to add from your vantage point?
Ellie, if I could jump in on, gosh, Quentin, I'm hanging on your words, such, learning from them as we go along. In building on what you said about the safety aspect, and also, Ellie, your story of making sure that you have an environment where people feel comfortable and safe talking about any mental health, behavioral health challenges that they have, that comes back down to communication. And so now you've set that, Quentin, that is a safe place you're coming into, take a moment to exhale, then look at, why does that matter? And the clear communication, the constant communication is something that I'll say Cigna as an employer has done a really good job at. So there are no surprises. What we can control, we will control, and make sure that we're clear in communication, allowing folks to have enough time to think about what would my new work environment look like if it's changing. So that hybrid approach or return to office, and if you have concerns about your own health, about childcare, about elder care, that those are all you're given time to think about the impact to that. I think that more than anything, I'm going to switch to our clients. We recently did a survey of mid-sized clients, and they came back and said, just resoundingly, all of them are adding this concept of whole health or behavioral health into their wellness strategies. And they're weaving it into their company culture. It's really who they are, because this is what they understand and what all listeners should really ground themselves in. If you're a business leader or part of a business, this is a business imperative right now, that employees feel safe to come back to work, that they know that the company cares about them, and they have a whole health approach, not just physical health. We're talking about mental health as well, and the ability to support that will help their business thrive, because a healthy workforce is a productive workforce. And that productive workforce is really going to help to drive that growth that most companies are looking for right now, and finding a new way to achieve that growth.
Definitely. Anneke?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And just touching on the issue of stigma, which has already come up a couple times in this conversation. And stigma is not a problem just in the workplace. It's a cultural problem in regards to, mental health is being seen somehow a sign of weakness that we wouldn't, Allie, you touched on, having a broken leg is something that's not stigmatized. But then if you are having depression or anxiety or something, people see it as like a personal weakness, and it becomes stigmatizing because people don't want to talk about it because they feel vulnerable. They feel like they're going to be judged. And it's so important in the workplace to make sure that there is consistent messaging that contradicts that stigma, and that there's awareness and ongoing assessment about the culture within any organization to ensure that people really do feel safe, not just physically safe, but safe coming forward and saying, I'm struggling right now. That they're not going to be seen as a poor team member. They should be seen the same way if somebody came forward and said, I have cancer right now, right? Or I slipped down the stairs yesterday and I broke my ankle, that it should be seen in that same light. And it's just, stigma is probably one of the primary barriers to people seeking care, talking to others, getting support. So it's really critical to continue to address it.
I completely agree. To the point of stigma, I think we talked a little bit about this, Monica, before we joined, but to what extent have you seen kind of people openly sharing and breaking down that barrier in terms of leadership at organizations? What role do leaders have to play in terms of openly talking about this topic and therefore role modeling that behavior for their employees to do the same?
It's such a big question, such an important question. And it goes back to building that culture of health, making the health of the workforce a priority. I believe that the next evolution of this that we'll see once we kind of check the box that this is really important. Now we ask ourselves, how do we measure that? Because it's hard to measure it for employers, but it's going to be built at the highest levels of each employer and then carried through. A recent study that we conducted with The Economist points out that employees are looking for those trusted sources of information, and they're not getting it from the typical places we would expect. They're putting the employer at the top of the list of a place that they go for trusted information. So pair that with your question of exploring how important is it that leadership care about the health of their workforce. It's tremendously important because employees are relying on that. In this battle that we have right now for talent, boy, Quentin, you're probably in the heart of it, and Allie, you as well, to build that culture to help retain that top talent within your organization, again, feeds that bottom line. It is a business imperative. So I would look to the C-suite to really lead the way in that messaging.
Yeah, agree. Quentin, have you seen any examples of that in your role, kind of examples of, bold leadership when it comes to being open and vulnerable about mental health? You're on mute, sir.
I said, yes, I had. It's my cat jumps up on.
And hi, kitty.
That won't cause me any stress. It's just a part of what I'm home now. But what is interesting, as Monica spoke, I thought about the fact that never before have I seen such an open discussion about mental health in the workplace. And I think I would say I started to see it rise from a data perspective. One of the things that we started to do maybe about 4 weeks into this remote working is we were doing these check-ins, and Monica talked about the importance of communication and transparency. And so we talked to employees and asked them, basically, how are you doing? And it was employees who were experiencing for the first time, I am trying to work from home, but now I'm doing it 8+ hours on screen. In addition, I have kids that are being homeschooled and the challenges that brings. All of these things are converging at the same time. And employees got to the place where they felt, I can't continue this. And I can't continue this without any support. So I need to talk to someone about it. So I had not seen that to this degree pre-COVID. Pre-COVID as it relates to our earlier discussions, very much private and low key for the fear of how we would be judged. But if COVID did anything, it kind of leveled the playing field because we were all going through this at the same time. And we were doing these like lunch chats or these after work happy hours. And that's when these discussions started to come up, where people were saying, I'm not doing great. Tell me some of the things that you're doing. And that's when people started to really reveal. But from a leadership perspective, there were some things that we had in play pre-COVID that we just needed to remind people of in terms of resources. Our employee assisted program that provides employees 10 free counseling sessions in addition to their family members. If you look at the number of people who utilize these pre-COVID, very low. During COVID and now, that number has improved, not improved, but maybe it is an improvement. It has increased tremendously. And so there are other platforms that we offer. There's one that I really love that we've seen increase as well. It's called Mequilibrium, and it's an app that provides a comprehensive stress profile and assessment, and it recommends stress management skills. So in addition to having these counseling sessions available, but also having all these digital resources that people can utilize. It caused the leadership to say, hey, let's put these back out in front of you so that you are aware. We know it's important, we feel it's important, and we want you to utilize these as we navigate this time together.
We've seen a massive rise in digital healthcare, that's for sure. If telehealth, mindfulness apps, mental health therapy apps. Here at Accenture, we use Talkspace across North America to get folks access to care. We also rolled out Calm, the mindfulness app, free to our people, and WISA, W-I-S-A, which is an AI chatbot. Penguin, it's a penguin who's a therapist in your pocket that does mood checks. And we've seen a huge rise in that and uptake of that. And I think what benefited our employees most was that we made them accessible to their dependents as well.
Yes.
We're hearing a lot about children in particular and teens, and trends say that most mental illnesses manifest in people before age of 14. And so with everyone being homeschooled and lack of social connection, we're seeing that rise even more. So the parental factor, working parent, is certainly high on the minds of, I'm sure, all of you and all of us here at Accenture. Anneke, from your standpoint, kind of what are the biggest concerns that that you're thinking of over the course of your career? Kind of what concerned you before COVID and what's really top of mind now?
The biggest impact, I would say, that we've seen is definitely moving to telehealth, which we just touched on. We were offering telehealth, but it was kind of sparsely used previously, and then spent 18 months or so exclusively providing telehealth. And so that has shifted many things. It's made access easier for people. It's definitely changed the work environment for mental health providers because now it's done remotely. It turns out it works really well. And then I would say the other thing, you know, people have anxiety, people have depression. Those are fairly common and universal experiences. A lot of times people have, it's not rarity to have that happen at some point in your life. But what happened to the pandemic was a great increase, Allie, that you touched on in your introduction. We saw, the clinic is now in its 5th year, and year 2 was the last year that we had no pandemic. So when we look at year 2 versus year 3, when the pandemic started, versus year 4, we saw a 35% increase each year over prior years in requests for services. So year 2 to year 3 was about 35%, and then year 3 to year 4, which for us just wrapped up, another 35%. So we're approaching doubling the number of requests for services. And because of all the things that we've just talked about happening, and that's had a profound impact, and has highlighted in the field of mental health that we really have a shortage of providers also, and that you know, it's not a factory where we could, you know, we had a shortage of masks, for instance, early on, and the factories got caught up, and you know, now we have a good supply, but it takes many years for somebody to become a mental health provider, and it's probably, we're really looking at a very long tail of recovery in terms of the field to have enough providers to meet the demand.
Ali, if I could just mention, when we're, as you asked about trends, one of the things that I have always been challenged with is sleep, right? Just having difficulty going to sleep and then sleeping through the night. We collected so much data, and who knew the number of people who are just not able, that just are not able to get a full 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. And if you think about the lack of sleep, what that does to your mental health. As a result of that, we've been able to employ a number of digital apps and mental health providers to provide this access to our employees who are really struggling with, how do I get sleep? How do I rest? How do I turn this off so that I can do so without going on an Ambien or some other type of sleep drug to help in that regard? But it is interesting to see, what I'm happy to see is the utilization of these services and these resources that we're providing to employees and the discussions that are happening around them.
Quentin, it might not be
Go ahead, Anneke.
Yeah, it might not be obvious to all of the attendees here today, but using the health plan data to guide your decision making, I think most employers are looking at that data, having some aha moments of, wow, we didn't realize this, and then tying those results and those aha moments back into a strategic plan. So if you have a wellness campaign, it might, in your example, be more geared toward what is the impact of stress? The impact of stress is this, including lack of sleep. And then what are some of the alternatives? We've seen employers, think about EAP. There might be a stigma with EAP. EAP means a bad thing, or I'm in trouble, or I need help. Maybe renaming that program, if you will, and really tying other resources like the digital ones that you mentioned, Allie, back into the plan, but creating those moments of connecting the data with people who really need this, and then helping those employees and their families really trust that you're surrounding them with resources that matter, timely and relevant.
Absolutely. I think we have results from our poll. I didn't want to interrupt the dialogue, so I just wanted to see what people were saying. So for those of you on the call, sounds like most of you are okay, good, or great. That's good. Only about 5% are doing poorly. So for those 5%, if you want help, feel free to direct message anyone on the panel, and I'm sure we can point you to some free resources. But good to know that some people are okay, doing all right. What are they worried about? Let's see, number one answer, work-life balance. Aren't we all? So work-life balance followed by expectations and workload. So all kind of in that same vein, same category. And I think work-life balance is something we should definitely discuss. We've all got tips and tricks. And then the reason they're here is they were just interested or personally connected to the subject, most folks. So thank you for being here. Thanks for participating in the poll. We love to hear from the audience. So let's tackle that work-life balance. It's actually one of the questions I was going to ask each of you is kind of how do you decompress in this virtual always-on working world? And I have to say that I feel like Americans in general were working too much anyway before the pandemic, right? I mean, we were all working 24/7, plugged into our devices. Can't see it with my background 24/7. So how do we tackle work-life balance in order to reduce stress that will trigger mental illness? Who wants to share first?
I'll jump in and say, I think it's much harder working remotely and you're working at home to have that life-work balance. And there's studies that support this, that essentially your work spills over into other times. You think I'll just hop on after dinner and take care of these emails, or I'll just, get up early and take care of that. And so setting, really being very intentional about setting those limits so that you do turn off the work at some point. You're not just sort of on call and working the entire time that you're at home. Sometimes those best weekends are things where you really don't do anything, to not feel like you have to have big plans or big activities. That downtime is really important. And if your downtime looks like, reading a book on the porch for a couple hours, that you should make sure that you're doing those things, those pleasant activities. It doesn't always have to be purposeful kinds of things. It can be just a lazy Saturday afternoon, for instance.
It's true. We don't always have to do something. Monica, what are your thoughts on
so many learnings in that? And lots of folks saying, I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to return to right. We can all agree with that life. From a personal perspective, time away from the screen. And we're all so busy that our calendars are packed. And so finding that time and blocking it on the calendar as your own appointment and working to protect that time, I think are really, it's a really important time. I think employers are realizing that, you know, they recognize the need for people to bring their best selves to work. And how do you bring your best self every single day if you can't step away and get that, you know, moment of take a breath or actually eat something or move your body away from the screen? And so really important that employees do that, but really lead by example. So if you've got a manager, frontline manager, a director, work on up through the organization hierarchy that are not only doing that, but then they're talking about it. And back to your comment, Allie, about intentionality in doing that and making sure that that becomes part of the culture and it becomes a behavior that's replicated because it's okay. It's okay. Quentin's nodding.
Yeah, I am, because I fully agree. You and Anneke both used the word intentionality, which is the exact word I was going to use, because it does come down to making a personal choice to disengage and to stick with that. I'll give you an example. It is rare pre-COVID and that I would not on vacation check in at least once a day, right? Not the best thing to do, but I did. And then you get stuck in that. During COVID, I took vacation, although I had nowhere to go. But being intentional about shutting off and disengaging so that I could find that mental space where, and I'll use the words of Adam Grant, where I could find space to think deeply, whether that is about something personal, whether it's about something professional, but to go into that deeper level of thinking that you don't always get to do when you're going from meeting to meeting, call to call, and always turned on. So for me, a strategy is trying to find 30 minutes a day where I can just find a space and say, hey, even if it is taking a walk around the block between calls, where I can engage in some deep thinking so that I can settle myself and be ready for the next challenge. That's one of the things that I do. And then the other thing is on the weekend, making certain that I am managing my time during the week so that on the weekends I can be engaged with my son, engaged with my family, and then start to resume late Sunday or on Monday, but being intentional about that time.
Yeah, echo everything you're saying. Intentionality is key. I have two rules, two things that I'll share. One is I block my calendar. I'm a single mom. My son is 7. I block my calendar every morning and every day at 3 to take him to school and pick him up. And I do not let anyone get into that slot for a call, because if I am trying to get him ready for school, get him to school and juggling a phone call, I'm not present. I'm not engaged. I'm not focused. And either my son or the people on the other end of the phone are suffering. So I protect that time. And I do not engage with work during those times. 2, for anyone using Microsoft, Microsoft Outlook has a fabulous button called Insights. And I encourage you to all find it right now in your email. But if you're on Microsoft Outlook, it's called Insights. And you can turn it on and it's going to monitor every email and every action you do with Microsoft tools and give you a report each week on how you're doing on your wellness. But more importantly, it's going to help you block that focus time, that deep thinking time into your calendar for you. So Monica can let the people that manage your calendar know about this tool, but it will block it out for you. It blocks lunch, it blocks walking time, deep thinking time, your PTO time, whatever you want. Now I will encourage you can do that, but it's up to you to stick to it. So use the tools and then protect them, because downtime is super important. Sure.
Thank you. That needs to become a behavior or a habit. Yes. That becomes a behavior.
Absolutely. Love micro habits. All right, we're gonna get to some of the audience's questions in just a moment, but I have one more for you, and this is kind of on leadership, as well as performance of people in the workplace, right? So we've talked a lot about stigma. To what extent can we incorporate and encourage a more positive working environment so that if someone does raise their hand and say, I have depression, I have anxiety, I'm bipolar, I'm this or that, when they do have the courage to speak up, that it's not seen as a weakness, that they're not going to get, dinged on their performance or no longer looked at for promotion. What can we encourage leaders at companies to do to make sure it's safe? Any thoughts on that one?
I'll start us off.
Okay.
We've partnered with an organization for a wonderful program called Mental Health First Aid. And this is, you're aware of it, Allie. I think it's a great program, and that helps, we help our clients to roll out this training to frontline managers. Because as I said at the beginning, we have employees that look to their employers for information, trusted source of information. And so if those frontline managers could be the eyes through the screen or back in the workforce to say something doesn't seem quite right. It does not sit as a responsibility as a clinician like Anneke, but it certainly is a, hey, is everything okay? You start to build that support system for that individual and then break down any barriers that they might have around fear of talking about it. And it might be that they're struggling with something that is new to them or something that's not new to them, or it might be that someone at their home is struggling and they're really bringing that to the workplace, whether that is, again, behind the screen or back into the workforce. And so I think empowering at each level within the organization, that ability to open up the dialogue. We know we've more than ever before been closer to each other, whether it's peering into their home through their screen or then creating this safe environment of coming back to the workplace. We've had to ask those probing questions of our employees who are even closer, more closer than before. But a program like Mental Health First Aid could really help to just build those skills among those frontline managers, or however you'd like to use that as a training in the organization.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think I'll start with this. It is really bringing the conversation into the organization where it's not something that's added on, but it is built into the culture. That mental health is a part of our culture because we are concerned about our greatest asset, which are our people. And we have to curate and care for what their needs are. One of the things that I love that's really happening during this time is that we have now, we have such a pattern and a rigor and a focus on mental health. And we're approaching it from many different vantage points, and I'll just name one or two. One is there's usually a monthly lunch and learn, a enterprise-wide broadcast just on the subject, on the topic of mental health, on how to think deeply and think more positively. For some of our ERGs, like our Young Professional Network, they have taken up this charge. So they're approaching mental health from their perspective. As a matter of fact, at the end of this month, they're holding an enterprise-wide event where they're talking about mental health, the resources, the challenges of their generation. But you also do that in an organization where someone at my age, which will remain secret, but it's over 40, there are different concerns that I have, right? And so there are ERGs that are talking specifically about mental health challenges, stress that relates to me. So just the fact that the conversations are such a part of the organization, not an add-on, not separate, but a part of everything that we do, it's embedded into the everyday discourse.
I would say, from a leadership perspective that, prior to the pandemic, employers who maybe didn't have any remote workers suddenly discovered themselves having a fully remote workforce, and jobs that had been perceived as not being feasible remotely suddenly became of necessity, became feasible. To see these challenges or needs that employees may have, to approach them with creativity and flexibility. That what, if anything, has that we've learned in this past 18 months so far of this pandemic experience, was that things can work really well differently than we thought that they had to work. And there's an opportunity, not just to establish a culture of, destigmatizing culture and be supportive and work, support our employees, but really come with a flexible mindset about how can I work with this person's needs to make this, to make this feasible for them. And that can look, we've figured out that it can look like a lot of different ways. It can look like hybrid schedules. It can look like fully remote schedules. It can look like flex hours and things different than what we were doing prior to the pandemic. And that goes a long ways towards reducing stressors. Like Allie, you mentioned, you just have these times blocked that you're not available, and you've had the flexibility to do that. And that's tremendously important to you. And so it's important for leaders and organizations to come with that same flexibility. And that remote work has allowed us to do that to a much greater degree than maybe was possible in the past.
Yeah. And I recognize, maybe not everyone has the privilege that I have to be able to block my calendar and just switch off during that time. So I appreciate that some folks, either frontline workers, doctors, nurses, people in call center environments and different working worlds may not have that, but the ability to ask for, downtime and ask for extra time off or ask for benefits should be a privilege we all, can seek. On that note, there's a few questions in the chat from our audience about protections, in particular for federal employees. I know that in the US, mental illness was only covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act and Equal Employment Opportunities in 2016. That tells you how long it took for mental illness to even be considered as a disability. So I feel you on that. I'm not familiar with federal employees and the protections afforded to them in terms of when they do say they have a mental health condition or getting time off or asking for their performance review. Are any of you familiar with that? And I think basically the person is saying, there's no protection for federal employees if a fitness for duty is ordered. There's no oversight board or panel. They see any mental health issue as automatic justification for consistent with meets expectations, right? And so I wanted to see kind of what our thoughts are on that. Like, how might we address that group in terms of protections? Anyone want to have a go?
I can't speak to the, the specifics of the regulations around federal employment or some of the employment laws. But definitely on the clinical side of the house, we do get requests from people, for documentation for FMLA, or, I need to take a week off. Can you write a letter? Kinds of things. It varies widely. Most of my clinical work was actually with the military, where we got more of these fitness for duty questions. And the military is an entirely different animal from civilian employment in terms of there really aren't disability protections for the military. So it's, there has absolutely been, the stigma has played out in terms of mental health conditions have not had the same parity across insurance coverage, across disability coverage that other medical conditions have had. It is a difficult process for people to get disability for any type, but particularly sometimes for mental health conditions.
Yeah, I have not worked in any federal capacities, so certainly not qualified to answer that question. It seemed to be geared towards working in a federal environment. So I can't answer that, but I will say that from a private perspective, I'm encouraged by the resources that are available. Anneke, she mentioned FMLA. Of course, that is a federal mandated piece of legislation, but certainly organizations, private organizations complement that in terms of the resources that we provide so that the employee can navigate that difficult terrain in getting back to better health or a healthier state through the various programs that we talked about, whether it be the counseling that's provided through EAP, whether it's through programs that we offer like SaLay, where an employee and spouse can be offered a health coach to help them navigate those challenges.
Got it. All right, there's a couple of questions about starting your own mental health program and peer-to-peer support. So I'm not sure how many of you have mental health peer-to-peer programs like we do at Accenture, but if you do, how would you start one in your organization, or what advice would you give for folks wanting to start one at their company? Anyone?
I'll jump in there, Allie. From a Cigna as an employer perspective, it's an overall peer-to-peer discussion. We recognized, as it was mentioned, when our whole workforce went virtual for the most part, we had to create those opportunities for connection. And so we've used different applications through our HR system. We have 70,000 employees globally. So finding the opportunity to not only stay connected, but use that connected time as ways to help employees grow. I know I'm part of the program, and I signed up for every 60 days that I get matched with someone with similar interests. So a parent that has children, that is a dual income working household, et cetera, paired up with someone else who's similar in my in opening up a dialogue of what the challenges might be, not necessarily a business discussion, but we both work for the same company and sharing those ideas back and forth. And I've found each and every connection I've had along the way has not only helped me personally, but helped me professionally. But I love that Cigna was the employer that said, we're going to make those connections a little easier by using a technology to do that.
Yeah, I love that, Monica. We found it very beneficial. I talked about ERGs before and can't talk about them enough because we have seen the benefit of all of these ERG groups throughout our organization. And so we found that as it relates to mental health, the best way to push and support those messages has been through our existing ERGs. So haven't had a need to stand up a separate peer-to-peer, but utilize the ERG groups that we already have in place. And they sometimes break off into smaller groups or teams as it relates to these subjects, but using the power behind already established groups has been extremely beneficial for us.
That's great. All right, we have 6 minutes left, so I'm going to take one more question from our audience and then hand it back to Jack to close us out. It's amazing how fast an hour can go. The last question really is around the hiring process and accommodations. And so we've got some folks who are looking for work and wanting to know what organizations they might tap into if they have a mental illness and still want to work. And then also about disclosure during the interview process and asking for accommodations. So anyone had experience in that realm? And I will just give one resource, Disability In. If you Google it, disabilityin.org has an incredible program for hiring people with all kinds of disabilities, both invisible and visible. So please Google Disability In and take a look at them. But yeah, what are our thoughts in terms of kind of disclosure and accommodations in the interview process for those looking for work. Anyone want to go first?
I'll just jump in there. So I don't have specific resources to share, but I will say this. It starts with the culture of the company that you're looking to work for. And I think the openness and opportunity to talk about your own needs, and that is your own healthcare needs, with that future employer, I think through those discussions and what their mission is, what they stand for, would really be strong indicators that I would point the person or folks that are asking the question toward, because those are, and I'm hoping that employers continue to have that open culture of looking at employees' health as a priority and measuring that you'll see more and more employment opportunities with companies that are willing to stand up and talk about it.
Yeah. I can add nothing to what Monica said, but there was a question that I saw in the chat from someone that I believe is a veteran, and they were asking about employment opportunities for veterans. And I'm certain, as it is at Comcast, it is I'm certain it is at Cigna. There are many companies that have such a strong advocacy to hire our veterans. Go to our websites and you would see the opportunities there. At Comcast, we do have an additional web page for veterans where we have some specific programs to recruit talent into the organization. So we would be happy to have veterans come into our organization. So please utilize those resources.
And I will add, and hopefully our moderator or our people behind the scenes controlling things could add a link to the Veteran Staffing Network, which is one of Easterseals programs specific for veterans, transitioning military members and their spouses and family members, but specifically looks to assist veterans with job placement into places like Comcast that want to hire veterans and have a desire to bring them into their workforce. Veteran Staffing Network also provides assistance with like job coaching and writing your resume and getting ready, to how do you describe your military experience in language that translates to veteran job skill or civilian job skills. And for those of you, I just saw various questions about PTSD or how do we seek care? The Stephen A. Cohen Military Family Clinic does provide evidence-based short-term behavioral health treatment to veterans regardless of discharge status. So if you're not eligible for care through the VA, you don't have VA benefits, you're still eligible for care through our clinic, to veterans, active duty, and their family members as defined by that person. So unmarried partners, for instance, adult children of veterans are eligible for care here. And we do work with people who maybe don't have the means to pay for treatment. We don't want cost to be a barrier. So I see lots of good links coming up. Employment and mental health are closely related. So we need a workplace culture that supports accessing care, and we need access to care for people who want to get back to work or who are struggling with their mental health to ensure that they are able to have the care that they need so that they're functioning the way that they want to be and can maintain employment.
Absolutely, Anneke. Thank you. Well, we have 1 minute left. I want to thank the panelists for being here today. Monica, Quentin, Anneke, appreciate your time. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you and learn from you. So back to you, Jack.
That's great. Thanks, everybody. Allie, thanks really for facilitating an important conversation. But I think even more importantly, thank you for sharing your personal story. I mean, that's really empowering for all of us. And I saw some personal stories in the chat as well, which I thought was great. And Alan, if you're still listening out there, you asked the question about how do we continue to, reduce the stigma? And I think this goes a long way, just sharing your personal stories, because, I think as human beings, we all have one. I mean, at different extremes, certainly, but we've all got things that, we all struggle with. So I think it's just getting out there and talking about them and, it's working through things and we'll make a lot of progress on that. So that was great. Monica and Quentin and Anneke, thank you for spending time with us and sharing your thoughts and insights. Very important. And I do want to thank our sponsors for helping us to make this series possible so we can continue to have these conversations. And so Verizon and Comcast, and our knowledge partners at Accenture. It's been really, really terrific. Our next webinar in the series will be on October 26th, 10 a.m. So please sign up for that. Then we'll be discussing advancing opportunities for individuals with disabilities. So that will be important as well. And so with that, everybody, stay well and have a great day. It's really beautiful outside.